Hello there, peace be upon you. Welcome to this new episode of Rational Religion, where we make sense of spirituality. In this episode of Believe You Me, we're going to be exploring Islamic economics. And Islamic economics follows on from the previous episode we've done on Islamic politics. We're going to talk about different economic systems, so communism, capitalism, the supposed halfway house of social democracies, and where they succeed, why they fail, and what the Islamic vision for an economic system is.
So, Omar, tell us a little bit about communism.
So communism is basically, it was a response to capitalism and to the gross inequalities that they saw. And what Marx and other thinkers at the time saw was that capitalism was causing huge inequalities, and that some people were living like kings and a huge amount of people were just their labourers. They had a very poor standard of living. And he and other thinkers saw that and they said, you know what, everyone should have basic standard of living. They should have a house, they should have food, they should have water, etc.
Yeah.
And that was the good thing about his vision. And the good thing about communism is that it did, when it was implemented in Russia, it did bring the standard of living of the very poorest right up, which is why it appealed to lots of countries in outside of Russia and why communism spread. However, there were some fatal flaws, some inherent contradictions in communism itself, which Marx and others failed to realise, but which history have borne out. Firstly, by trying to equalise things completely, which is what it does, it says that people, to each according to their need and from each according to their capacity, by trying to equalise things so perfectly, it represses human nature. It means that if you're someone who naturally is more enterprising, more intelligent or whatever, you are not able to express your inner talents and you are not able to work in the way that you want to in order to flourish. Because it removes the profit incentive, it removes the incentive of the private accumulation of wealth, which is behind so much of human flourishing. In doing so, it completely inhibits human progress because people don't want to work as much. They don't want to express their talents because they know that actually it's going to lead to no material change in their own circumstances.
I mean, if you can do an hour's work as a neurosurgeon, which takes 15 years to, of hard labour, effectively hard study to get to, and you can earn the same amount as doing an hour's work as a neurosurgeon as compared to hours work baling hay, right? Then a lot of people will be, what's the point?
Yeah, and you won't be seeking to even advance that field at all because at no point are you going to be able to build up to make things better for yourself or your family.
Yeah.
So it's a school of economic thought which in its good sense it uplifts the poorest in society, but in the long run it will fail and it will be outpaced by societies that allow the private accumulation of wealth because that incentivizes human enterprise and allows the basic human talents and individual talents to and aspirations to be achieved.
So, I mean, in the book Islamic Economics, I'll show you what the readers of the book is, or rather the viewers, not the readers. The Economic System of Islam by Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad, a phenomenal book, very small, goes into communism, and he states that communism is effectively state capitalism.
Yeah.
Would you be able to just explain what that exactly means?
Well, because he said, especially in the Russian case, what happened is that the country just turned into a firm. It just turned into a company with its own hierarchy through the Communist Party, where you had all the workers at the bottom who weren't able to actually climb up the ladder properly, and it had people at the top exploiting them, and they were living much better lives, and then acted as a company essentially taking over other countries and going into them. So essentially, it took much of the worst of capitalism and concentrated it into a nation, and thereby created essentially the same similar international problems. And what he did phenomenally is he explained all.
When was this written? Actually, it was
written just post-war. I think this was either during the Second World War or just after.
This was written in. It's a lecture delivered in 1945.
Yeah. And he basically says that these are the inherent problems with communism. It will be outpaced by capitalist societies. And what he said was extremely prescient and has been borne out to the T. So that's communism. Its fundamental flaws are that it doesn't respect human nature. It tries to stampede and destroy all kind of inequalities when there are natural inequalities in humanity, in the way we look, in the way that we think in our intelligence, in our interests, in our ambitions.
Yeah.
And communism stamps out all of these, let alone the fact that it represses freedom of conscience. So that's why, as an economic theory, it failed.
Yeah.
What about capitalism?
Well, capitalism is the polar opposite, and it's interesting because there are two fundamental aspects of God's attributes in Islam. There's Rahmaniyat, the Rahman, and there's Rahimiyat, the Rahim. right? And generally in Islam they're translated as the gracious and the merciful, but they don't really mean just gracious and merciful. Rahman, which is translated as gracious, actually means the one who provides for all, irrespective of their actions. In other words, like the sun, the moon, nobody can say that the sun is there shining down upon us, benefiting us because of some action that you've done. In other words, it's a grace given freely for all to work on further. Rahim, the merciful, is the attribute of God which rewards you for your striving, which rewards you for your work, for your study. And it's very interesting because communism and capitalism have kind of occupied the extreme versions and have neglected the other attributes. So Rahmaniyat, the attribute of giving freely and liberally and providing everybody with a basic level of life and health and benefiting from society, that is the attribute which communism fully took over and totally ignored the attribute of Rahimiyat, which was to provide people and incentivize work and to give them rewards in exchange for their actions.
Right.
Capitalism has done the exact opposite. It's all about rewarding people for their actions.
It's all about the profit motive.
It's all about the profit motive, and it has nothing to do with actually providing people with a basic level from which they can build upon. So the problem with capitalism is that it actually encourages extreme inequality, especially in the way that it's actually practiced. In a sense, Islamic capitalism is a completely different beast, and in fact it's truer to the term capitalism in itself, and we're going to discuss that a little bit. But capitalism as it's practiced, currently neoliberalism is often what it's called as well, it's effectively a policy and a way of structuring your economy which concentrates wealth to a very large extent amongst those who already have wealth and creates massive economic disparities. And as such, it neglects the poorer sections of society, foments rebellion, right?
Yeah.
Foments civil disorder, and effectively what you end up getting, therefore, is continual political unrest. And that's the end point both of communism and capitalism as a result. And that is what we've been seeing with the Occupy Wall Street movement. That's what we've been seeing with the progressive movement both in the US and in the UK, where we've seen the masses rise up, electing people like Jeremy Corbyn, electing people like Bernie Sanders, because people are sick of the austerity. Well, electing them as well. Well, Bernie Sanders nearly got elected. Jeremy Corbyn was elected as the Labour leader, right? The point is that these are anti-capitalist movements, in a sense, and anti-establishment movements, which have been fomented because of the way capitalism is practiced.
I think it's important to understand the history of capitalism in a way, and this is what a scholar, an economic scholar called Thomas Piketty, has done very, very famous work in recent years. What he's shown is that the history of capitalism over the past 150 years, this is the only time when we've really had data, is the history of those with capital, as you said, those with capital accruing more capital at the expense of those below.
Yeah.
So the trajectory of capitalism is for wealth to concentrate.
Yes.
That is what has happened throughout capitalist history. The only reason why we have had improvements in society generally is because you had huge wars, World War I, World War II, where private capital was destroyed, and where you had a levelling of the amount of money people had, and you have an upsurge in human sympathy leading to the implementation of more socialist policies, more welfare state policies.
And that's why you got social democracy, you got institutions like the NHS, you got nationalisation of railways, you got nationalisation of state services like utility bills, water, especially in the UK, immediately after World War II with the Labour-Attlee government.
And this is important because even in the post-war era, we've actually seen the trajectory of capitalism reassert itself. What happened? You had a huge destruction of private capital, the upsurge of human sympathy leading to socialist or social democrat governments producing really strong welfare state policies for the good of all, but within two and a half decades, you have enough private capital concentrating in the wealth in the hands of a few that because the wealth has been concentrated, they also concentrate power within themselves.
Yes. You
concentrate wealth, you concentrate power, and then in the 70s into the 80s, they capture regulation, they capture government, and they rig the economy in favour of the very wealthiest. And that's what you see with Thatcher, that's what you saw with generally the Republicans, and followed by New Labour and the New Democrats. We're talking about the US and the UK. So the trajectory of capitalism is for those with money to get more money at the expense of those below them. That has been borne out by economic history. The improvements that we've seen have only been due to the huge destruction of private capital, but the trend and the trajectory reasserts itself, always does. And it takes wars, it takes the destruction of private capital, or in some cases, very, very, very strong leaderships, almost freaks of nature, that come out that can draw things slightly towards the most socialist end, towards the idea of redistributing wealth but their wins will have been hard won and often short-lived.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And Piketty showed that, I think the statistics show that just before the eve of World War I in Britain especially, 90% of wealth, and what we mean by wealth is goods and services, capital, not just your income, but capital, right? Houses, land, so on and so forth, gold. 90% of it was accumulated amongst the top 5% of the population, right? 90% of the wealth of society. After the war, it came down to approximately 50. Now, or even less than 50, I think, and then now, since World War II, it's actually built up to approximately 75% again. Yeah. And we're reaching those levels of capital accumulation whereby they are subverting democracy. One of the main problems, however, with capitalism is something that, Piketty's mentioned, for example, accumulation of wealth, right? And other people have pointed out other causes. But one thing that Islam highlights as the fundamental driver and the problem with capitalist policies as they are today is something that nobody's mentioned. Absolutely nobody.
So you're saying, you took one for the team and decided to read that tome of Piketty.
700 pages.
Do you feel like he actually, he seems to have elucidated very, very deeply the fact that this is the trajectory of capitalism for wealth to concentrate. Do you feel he fully teased out why that happens?
No, not at all, because he says that the causes are because capital over generations accumulates faster than income does. Right? And that is correct, but he doesn't say why capital accumulates faster than income does. And that is the key question. He leaves that unanswered. And the reason actually is because of what Islam teaches, which is interest.
Is the primary reason.
Interest, and the process of interest is the fundamental reason why capital accumulates faster than income. And that is because it is an exponential relation. So what is interest? If you take a bank loan out if you take a loan out from a bank.
So I'm a rich person or a rich institution.
Yeah.
You come to me for a loan. Yeah. I give you that loan, and I said, a little bit of interest.
Yeah.
Why is that harmful?
That's extremely harmful because what happens is that that's half the story. So if you take a loan out from the bank, or I take a loan out from you, as you're the rich institution, I have to pay 1% back to you, right? So I have to effectively generate more wealth than I'm taking out of the system and give it back to you. On the other end, you have very rich people who deposit their money in the bank and they get interest on their money. And so you have a fundamental relationship whereby the indebted become more indebted and the wealthy who have wealth become wealthier. And that's not the only picture. It's a bit more complicated than that, but it's beautiful when you understand it, okay? If you imagine a society in which you have 100 Coke bottles, okay, and you have £100. So now what you do is, let's say we have that £1 equals one Coke bottle and one Coke bottle equals £1. Okay? So now what we're going to do, we're going to increase the money supply. So now you're going to have £200 and 100 Coke bottles. How much is one Coke bottle going to be worth?
Will you tell me?
£2. Okay? So each Coke bottle is going to be worth £2, but £1 can only now buy you half a Coke bottle.
Right.
Whereas before it could buy you a whole Coke bottle. And that's what happens when you increase the money supply without a commensurate increase in the goods and services in society. You devalue money while making the prices of things look artificially high.
So basically saying that it's a natural cause of inflation.
That's not yet. It is a natural cause of inflation, but it's even worse than that. Right. Okay? The Prophet Muhammad explained this principle of interest very nicely. When asked about interest, he said, does money reproduce itself? Does money have kids?
Yeah.
Okay? And the answer is no, money doesn't actually have kids. Okay? And he pointed to a fundamental point, which is that when you increase the population, then you need to increase the money supply. Right? But money in and of itself has no effect on the growth rate of the economy. Okay? So when you have an increase in the goods and services, the growth rate, then you need an increasing money supply to keep the prices stable. Because if you had 200 Coke bottles and £100, then you would have the devaluation of prices of a Coke bottle.
Yeah.
Right? So this is a fundamental point about interest. It is a multiplication in the amount of money without an increase in the commensurate number of goods and services in society. Now, where does that multiplication of the money come from? Where does interest really come from? Does it come from that aspect of interest where the indebted become more indebted? No, it doesn't, right? They have to find the money from somewhere. They don't buy it. They don't make the money. They don't have a printing press home. They print more money and then give it back to the bank.
They have to actually earn it.
They have to actually earn the money. But where does the money come from? Money doesn't grow on trees, okay? And it doesn't spontaneously appear out of economic activity, okay? Money is printed, and is printed by banks.
Or digitally created. Yeah.
Digitally created, printed, same thing. And it enters into society not at the level of the poorest, but at the level of the richest, right? The way that interest comes into society is when you put £100 in the bank, you've got a 1% interest on your deposit, and you get £101 back. That bank has printed that money out of thin air. It's entered into the rich, so the richest people who have will generate the most amount of interest because
they have the most savings.
Because they have the most savings, because they have the most money in their bank, they will get the most amount of interest. They will then spend that money into society, right? But because they have the first right, because they are the first people to spend that particular currency, that newly created money into society, they're the ones who will actually increase the prices of goods and services in society by the time the money gets in. Because the market will always sell at the highest price. Yeah. But because they have the first right, they actually get the cheapest price. Because that new money hasn't yet entered.
So vendors sell to the highest bidder.
Vendors sell to the highest bidder, but when they are spending that interest-created money into society, it's the first time it's entering into the economy. So they get prices on the cheap, and they've got more money to spend.
But
right?
But
one second.
High for everyone else.
1 second. By the time that money circulates in society, it's lifted the tide of prices. Okay? And by the time that money that was newly created and first went into the rich person's account is spent fully into society, by the time it gets to the bottom, to the poorest person, the prices have gone up, the value of money has gone down, and their debts have increased.
Right.
So they're trying to buy rising prices assets with devalued money while getting more in debt, and also with austerity policies
that usually go
along with it all, have a capped increase in their increase in wages below inflation levels.
Okay.
So interest is actually the fundamental driver of economic capital accumulation, and therefore is a fundamental driver of Piketty's theory and what we have seen.
Capitalism. The essence of capitalism is the transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich.
Yes.
And let me just quickly summarise, and let me know if I've got this correctly, what you said. There are a few different ways that interest does this. Firstly, I'm a rich person, I'm a money lender, nowadays there's banking institutions. You need money. You come to me and you say, I need this money. I give you that money plus interest. You have to pay interest on the loan by earning that money outside in the real economy.
Yeah.
If you do that, then I win. Because I get the money I gave you back plus interest.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, I win. Because I have secured your loan, my loan to you against your assets.
Yeah.
So then I take your assets. I win.
Yeah.
At the same time, rich people and rich institutions have their money, have savings, etc., have savings in the bank, which gain huge amounts of interest because they have more capital. More capital you get, same interest rate will get you even more money.
Yeah.
Because they have lots of savings. If you have an interest rate on that, then your money will increase. They take this money, and if and when they do actually spend it in the real economy, vendors sell to them because they're the highest bidder. So prices are set at a higher level than they would be otherwise.
Yeah.
These prices are set at that generally higher rate, and that hurts you because prices are higher. So your money is basically worth less.
Yeah. So you get the devaluation of money and increased assets.
So it's like a 3D thing in multiple dimensions. Yeah. You have the transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich.
Yeah.
Even if the poor do get richer, are able to work to live a little bit better, you have a higher increase, a relative increase in the wealth of the people at the very top. Meaning that actually it's just a constant system of exploitation.
Yeah, and because interest is generated and enters into the society by the spending of the rich first and foremost, it fundamentally means that whatever they spend on, the prices of those go higher. We've seen that it's in London with housing, right? Yeah. You have millions of investors all over the world who actually want to keep their assets and their money safe, so they come to the UK, they pay for really expensive houses, they're able to set the bar the highest, prices therefore shoot up. Yeah. It's not just a matter of demand, it's also a matter of demand by those who are richest, who are effectively getting money for free through interest. Right? And so while the poor person has to go out and work for their money, the rich person just has to...
Well, the poor person burns alive because the profit motive has actually destroyed their own housing and led to poor quality housing.
Yeah.
In
Grenfell Tower, that's absolutely right.
The rich live like kings.
Yeah.
And we see this not only within Western countries, but also... I think even potentially more importantly, you see it in the institutions, the financial institutions which the West has set up through the IMF, through the World Bank. They enslave people through debt.
Yes.
They have they make these huge loans to poorer countries. They force them to take these loans on. Then they charge them huge amounts of interest while putting on them austerity measures that mean that it's a double hit, and their people get poorer and poorer. They're never able to pay off their debts, and they're essentially enslaved to the richer countries.
And we see this with Greece very clearly.
Right, and I think that's an important point actually, because people can say, well, what about social democracies? What about Britain's okay, but what about Germany that seems to do pretty well, doesn't have that high levels of poverty? And what about some European countries? Well, through the EU, basically the financial institutions in the EU are doing exactly the same thing to the poorer countries in the EU. Yeah. Greece is being burdened with unbelievable amounts of debt. Yeah. It's every 6 months or so it gets some new loan, which then goes. The European banks, they issue the loan to the Greek people because they can't pay off the previous loans, and then they get that money back because the loans are used to pay off the previous debts to the same banks. Yeah. While the interest is put on the country. Yeah. Along with the austerity measures to apparently pay for that and to be fiscally responsible.
Yeah, and to get the interest back, they have to take the private assets, they have to take the national assets, privatise the roads, privatise the airports, and sell them off to private people who then
to the banks. Usually, the people who invest in the banks.
Absolutely.
So this is the essence of capitalism. Whether it's within countries or whether countries like Germany, etc., can set up financial institutions that allow the expression of capital accumulation, this will always happen in a capitalist system. And social democracies have only very, very limited success. Where they do have success, it is swiftly dismantled by the accumulation of wealth and power in the top 1%.
And can I just follow on from that? Why is it that social democracies fundamentally usually fail, right? Or they're reversed. They effect a good effect, but they don't really have lasting consequences. And that's because they don't actually address the real root cause of the problem, which is interest, capital accumulation, right, and a fair taxation system. The reality is that we need to actually look at what Islam teaches in the Islamic Economics to basically see how an economy should be structured. And it is completely different to both social democracy, to communism, and to capitalism.
But the important point is that actually Islamic vision is similar to that of social democracy. And we sympathise greatly with people who support social democracies, democratic socialists as they're called, who basically say, look, we should have personal enterprise, you should be able to accumulate private wealth, but you should also realise that there's social responsibility in doing so, and you shouldn't allow wealth to concentrate. The problem is they don't have the policies to actually implement that in a long-term basis.
No, they don't.
Because they support an interest-based financial system, which transfers wealth from the poor to the rich.
Absolutely.
Islam, I think, shares a similar vision for its economic system. It says, yes, human nature must be expressed. People should be incentivized to work hard and to work creatively and get rewarded for that. But in their wealth, this is what the Quran says, beautifully says. It says, in the wealth of the rich, is the poor have a right to it. Because the poor and the people who are less advantaged ultimately helped the rich people to accumulate their wealth.
Absolutely.
And it says what must happen is that a portion of that wealth must be returned to the poorer sections of society because they have a right to it. It's not that it should be given as charity in an ideological sense. It's that wealth is already theirs and it has to be returned to them.
That's right, because if you're the owner of a company and you use the roads and the infrastructure and you use the health service and you use the network of shops and foods and use the entire infrastructure of a country which is built by people at different rungs of society contributing and maintaining that society and holding it together, then actually a portion of your wealth and your profit actually is part of that, is their
belongs
right
to them.
And belongs to them. Not all of them, but part of it. And I think it would be good to actually go on to the Islamic policies and to discuss how actually Islam, addresses a lot of these fundamental problems
and fulfills the vision of social democracy.
Yes, absolutely. So I think the thing we have to begin with actually is two fundamental premises of Islamic teachings, and they are that wealth is created through the circulation of money. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing. That is something that is outlined in the Quran. The Prophet Muhammad is addressed and he's told that in respect of the wealth that has come to his community, that do not let it circulate purely among those among you who are rich, right? Make it circulate also among those who are poor. And this is something that has been demonstrated time and time again, that the wealthiest societies are those in which money actually circulates.
Yeah, this is today now. It's mainstream economic theory. It's about part of what makes wealth is money velocity, how fast, how much it travels through society.
Absolutely. So if I have £1 and I give it to you, right, and I sell you a Coke bottle, and then you sell it to Joe Bloggs, and it circulates 7 times, you've brought into being 7 different products. Yeah. Society has become wealthier. If I give it to you, and as with Greece, it comes straight back out of the economy and into somebody else's bank account, hasn't contributed to the actual chain of trade, right, at all. So the fundamental premise of Islam is that wealth must circulate. Okay, to generate money must circulate to generate wealth. The second point is that how do you get it to circulate? Do you tax income or do you tax capital? And this is where Islam actually differs significantly from social democracy. You see people a lot of the times complaining about how if the socialists get into power, they're going to raise taxes to 70, 60%, it's so unfair. And to a certain extent, the idea of taxing income in and of itself is not a smart thing. It's not, because income is the means of trade. You get your income, you then spend it into the economy, and you power the economy.
And generally, income taxes are regressive. Because
yes, they absolutely are.
People live on that. Poor people live on their incomes.
Poor people live on their incomes. Very wealthy people live on their wealth. Okay, so actually, wealth taxes are far more progressive. Okay, because you can say, look, if you have assets less than £1 million, you're not going to pay anything. You're not going to pay any wealth tax. If you have assets above £1 million, you're going to pay 5%. Okay, right. If you have assets above £5 million, you're going to pay 15%. And you go up generally, and there's a staggered grade, it's exactly like income tax brackets, but you would actually generate more wealth. And the important thing about that is that you're not taxing the means of trade. People can still earn money.
And the means of living.
And the means of living. People can earn money, they can still spend it into the economy, they can still drive the economy. What they're taxed on in Islam is their unused wealth after a year, which sits above a particular threshold. And the interesting thing is, Piketty, in his book, Capital in the 21st Century, hailed as one of the great economics books of our century so far, he advocated exactly the same thing, except that he did a modified version. He didn't say unused wealth.
More rudimentary version, actually.
A more rudimentary version. He said that all wealth over a particular bracket, over a particular value, set at market rates. And he said, unfortunately in his book, he said that this has never been done in the history of the world. And I had a bit of a correspondence with him, actually, and I pointed out to him, and actually Muslim civilizations did this for about 800-900 years.
Yeah.
Okay, and the Prophet Muhammad actually began this. It's called zakat. It's one of the fundamental pillars of Islam.
Yeah.
Right, and it actually, in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, it ranged, depending on the type of asset, from 2.5% to 20% of capital.
Yeah.
Okay, set above a particular threshold of the value of a particular amount of gold.
So, I think what you've touched on with the whole idea that it's unused wealth is really important, because it's not a pure wealth tax.
No, it's not.
In sense of it's not any wealth over a certain threshold is going to be taxed. What Islam wants is, as you said, money to circulate in society. If rich people are investing their money in society, then they're already contributing to society. They won't have to pay tax on that wealth.
Yeah.
What they'll have to pay tax on is unused wealth.
Yes.
So if it stays in, basically if it's unused and it doesn't circulate after a year, then you pay tax on that.
Yes.
So it's an incentive amongst for the rich amongst society to basically invest and to help all sections of society to grow economically. If they don't do that, then Islam says, okay, you can keep your savings, you can keep your capital doing nothing. We're going to take 2.5 to 20% of that and put it back into society. So the state then takes it.
Depending on the nature of the capital, and also depending on the amount. Now, people might say, well, how can you have a non-interest based system? Banks will never loan to people. Well, in an Islamic based system, debt has a very minor role to play in money creation and in the circulation of money. People, when you go to your bank and you have a private business and you want money from the bank, they wouldn't give you a loan in an Islamic system. They would have an equity share in your company. In other words, they would buy out a portion of your company, right? They would give you money for it, a bit like Dragon's Den. You all know Dragon's Den.
Venture capitalism.
It's venture capitalism, okay? And that would mean that the banks would have to be very rigorous, because they would effectively be part owners and part owners of the company, right? They'd have to be very rigorous about where they put their money. They'd put it only with people who they feel have a good business model. They would put it with people who they believe are trustworthy, okay? Yeah. And the benefit of that is it's investment. It's not debt. And debt is toxic to growth. Yeah. And one thing that a great book by Professor Atif Mian and Amir Sufi in the United States, they wrote a book called House of Debt in 2012 or 2013, and they show that as the levels of private debt grow, the more private debt you have, any economic shock that occurs then causes you to pull back on spending in the economy. And when you pull back on spending, you effectively decrease trade in an economy, you decrease the circulation of wealth, and then you get private businesses going bankrupt, people are laid off on their jobs, they can't make their own debts because they've got very high debts to pay as well, then they pull back on spending further, and it causes a massive chain reaction. And that's exactly what happened with the 2008 economic crisis. So Islam advocates a different model. It's not a debt-based model. So not only do you not have interest on loans, in Islam, loans would be a very minor portion of the economy. They would be saved for those people who actually need it as a form of charity.
Yeah.
In actual fact. They need a loan because they're in dire straits, and Islam advocates actually giving their loans as a form of charity.
And if they can't repay, then you can do debt forgiveness.
Yes.
So essentially what you're saying, the Islamic system is it does interest incentivizes people with money to lend no matter what, irresponsibly, because they know they're going to win either way.
Yeah.
Whereas Islam says that the financial institutions would invest in people, they do responsible investing, which will lead to real growth. And the point about debt you made is very interesting. That's also what he's saying is not just theory. This isn't just retrospective theory on recessions. Actually, there's a very interesting economist called Steve Keen, who before the recession in 2005 onwards in particular started campaigning saying, look, the models which I have show that high levels of private debt lead to recessions. Why? Because people, once you get above a certain threshold of private debt, they stop spending money in the real economy and they start spending money on just servicing the interest on their debts.
Yeah.
And he was right. And people like him, like Arthur Meehan, are correct. Private debt and interest are what cause recessions and what suck money out of the economy and create instability. So what Islam says is that you need a non-interest based system to ameliorate these fundamental issues.
Yes.
And that would achieve the vision of social democracy. That would achieve the vision that I think most people share, whether or not they subscribe to any particular political or economic school, which is that, you should be able to earn wealth, but you should also be socially responsible with that wealth.
Yes.
Well, Islam has the policies in order to enact that, has a series of other policies which we won't be able to go into now, such as inheritance laws, which mean that
wealth is distributed as widely as possible at death. And the other point I would like to make just before we wrap up is that one of the key things in Islam is that the money creation is the sole purview of the authority, right? Of the state. It's not for a bank to be printing money, because I don't know whether you know this, but at the moment, every single time that you take out a loan from the bank, they print the money. It's not some rich person's money that they then give you. No, it doesn't work like that. Every single time a bank makes a deposit, gives you a loan, right, gives you money for your mortgage, they've created that money from nothing. It's backed by nothing, and that wouldn't be a problem. That wouldn't be a problem if they were only printing that money in accordance with the growth of the economy, in accordance with the growth of the goods and services. As the number of bottles in the society grow, you increase the money supply. That's fine. That makes sense. That maintains
as a principle, but that shouldn't be the right of private institutions.
It shouldn't be the right of private institutions because they do it for profit. They don't do it for the national interest, and they're creating it as debt.
Yeah.
Right. And so they're actually creating massive debt bubbles, which will then cause people to pull back on their spending. When there's an economic shock, they won't be able to spend the money, and all of that money that's been created will basically implode.
So I think we believe that Islam has the answers that a lot of people out there are looking for. You don't have to be a Muslim necessarily to implement these policies. Even independent research scholars are realizing that these kinds of policies are what we need. So if you're a person of any kind of influence, or even everyone has influence your circles, your spheres. All right, thank you very much for watching this two-parter on politics and now on economics. If you have any questions, comments, let us know in the comments below. Also, we really want to be engaging with you a bit more, so drop us comments, drop us questions, specific questions, and we'll try and answer them in a separate video, which will be directly to you guys, just answering your questions.
And I think we will actually probably do another video on Islamic economics, on the specific policies, because we didn't really cover most of them. We didn't cover inheritance, we didn't cover laws against hoarding, we didn't cover against national resources, we didn't cover a heck of a lot.
Yeah, okay, so if you have specific questions on anything we've talked about, let us know, and we'll try and cover more of this stuff another time. For now, though, make sure that you subscribe to Rational Religion, go to our website.
Subscribe below.
Yep, that's the catchphrase. And go to rationalreligion.co.uk, where you can find we do loads more like articles and blog posts. If you just subscribe to this channel, there may be little gaps in the videos, but they will be filled in by articles on our website. Yep. Until then, peace be upon you. We'll see you next time.